And welcome everyone to EWA Podcast number 40. We are on to 40 EWA Podcast, and with me tonight, Saturday night special, a man who was out, gonna miss Super Brawl this year with a sunburn. He got out at the beach today. The man who runs the show, Newt, joining me for Podcast 40, NewtCast 4.0. Newt, how we doing tonight?
We're doing well, and that is true. I did get a little sunburn, so probably won't make Super Brawl. I know you would think maybe it would be healed up by now, or by the time of Super Brawl, but as you know, sunburn can be very severe. Really inhibits your ability to role play and/or right results.
Yeah, so. And for people that don't go outside often, it can be a really debilitating injury. I assume you don't get out much, so.
No, this is first time I've been in the sun in years.
Yeah, so hope you learned your lesson. Stay inside, stay on podcast, and we'll throw up, bam, top 10 list as well going on. Just throwing up some best ofs and one I made up, a couple that I made up for Newt that say like Newt's favorite writer, and it just says Craig on it. So stuff like, I mean, it's what I figured, but.
It sounds very accurate already.
So it's been a while since we've had you on. Obviously, lots of people have come and gone, and different people playing different characters and things of that nature. I think it's been since like podcast 20 since you and I got a chance to sit down and talk. So
which was probably literally like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was multiple years ago for sure. It's been nice to bring the podcast back, and there's definitely a plethora of new people to bring into the podcast and talk to. So I'm looking forward to getting some new people on, but definitely going to take advantage of having Newt here tonight. Obviously on Discord, I reached out to some people and I had them send me in some questions. And then I've also talked to some others and said, hey, we'd like to hear from you. What would you like to hear from Newt? And now Newt is going to have to face it, right? Or fingers right in his face. Why did you do this? Why? Super Brawl 2012, we're getting answers. No, we got some good questions and some good topics for you to talk about tonight.
Don't finger me, Craig.
That's not what you said before we got started. But
well, that was different.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess now that we're public. Yeah, so first off, EWA coming off a big tour of Japan. Actually a pretty limited run, just 2 weeks and then a pay-per-view. Kind of talk to me about how you felt that whole Japanese tour and pay-per-view came together and how it went as a whole.
So, for people that maybe haven't been around as long, earlier this year we did a Canadian tour. One of the things I kind of like to do, if you look at the schedule, actually I'm going to bring the schedule up now and see if the graphics are working. We've been having issues with the graphics.
Tiny Pick, what's going on?
Yeah, Tiny Pick's been being a bitch. Oh, it looks like it's working. Anyway, we kind of travel all over the country, the U.S. Mostly, and to be honest with you, I find that it doesn't really have an effect. You kind of can just change one arena to the next, and nobody really pays a whole lot of attention. Every now and again, somebody will write a role play, and it really focus on being in, Fairfax, Virginia or something. But for the most part, it kind of becomes irrelevant. And so one of the things I've tried to do is every now and again, maybe we'll do some kind of event in some kind of either special location, and maybe that's still in the United States, but something that has a little more history or a little bit more of a different environment. And then the idea is to maybe do some of these tours. So we did the Canadian tour. I think it was earlier this year. Pretty sure it was. And so I thought, well, we haven't been to Japan in a long time. I know they did a pay-per-view, I think Kessen or whatever, several years ago. And I know that there may have been a random show between then and now that we stopped in there, but I don't think so. Yeah. So the idea was, okay, we'll do something different. It'll kind of stand out a little bit. And I wanted people to kind of maybe use this as an opportunity to write a little bit out of their wheelhouse so that they have new environments to talk about, new, locations and things. And then I also wanted to kind of just prolong the build a little bit to Summer Stampede because Red, White, and Bruised and Summer Stampede kind of are the two big summer pay-per-views, and it's kind of a coin toss on which one is the bigger and more important. Historically, Red, White, and Bruised is the sort of longer running show, but Summer Stampede has built up to be a pretty big show through the years. So I wanted to kind of do a super show kind of in between there. I thought, well, what if we kind of go to Japan, do this little tour? We can add in a little Japanese pay-per-view there, and it'll kind of just be a side trip on the road to Summer Stampede, essentially. And I thought, for the most part, people embraced the idea pretty well. It was kind of a short stint, and then it was a very quick turnaround for the pay-per-view. So one of the ideas there is because it was in Japan and it was going to be a different pay-per-view, we would almost basically come out of Red, White, and Bruised with the Japanese pay-per-view booked, because it would be, and on paper I kind of already had it booked. You know, it was going to be a lot of interpromotional type matches, things of that nature, where it wouldn't be maybe not as competitive as a normal show would be, but just to kind of give a different feel, a little bit different. And this is actually an idea I had sketched out probably a couple of years ago, actually, where I thought we would do like a bunch of tag team matches, and people would be able to kind of pick up a character for one night that maybe they've always wanted to role play as, because a lot of these Japanese characters are kind of hard to do on a consistent basis. Yeah. But the thought is maybe you could use them once or twice for an event and make something fun out of it. Ultimately, the pay-per-view didn't quite come out that way, but that was the idea.
So, I mean, this is probably something that we'll see more of down the road as well in different capacities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible that we could do that again. I mean, it's a little different. If we went to the UK or something, it's not like you can't necessarily role play as some of those characters. I mean, half the fucking people in the Fed are from the UK in some capacity anyway. So
I mean, we did something similar a couple years ago with like the women's only pay-per-view. Like that was a different kind of pay-per-view for the month as well.
Right, kind of separated it. It kind of allows, gives a little bit of a distance between some of the other shows, allows people to maybe simmer some of their other storylines a little bit, so that they can't just immediately take it to the pay-per-view. And one of the things that kind of happened with Tokyo SOS is instead of being able to do a lot of these interpromotional matches that maybe I had originally planned, the Fed kind of ballooned up a little bit. We got a few extra people that started signing up, so they kind of got involved. And then Red, White, and Bruised kind of turned into a much larger show than it really was intended. And I mean that not in concept, but in legitimate matches. Yeah. Kind of turned down a couple of matches because it was like, I can't write 56 matches for this show. So we pushed a couple of matches into Tokyo SOS on the idea that, yes, instead of doing it at Red, White, and Bruised, we'll just turn around and we'll immediately do it at this Japanese pay-per-view in a couple of weeks. And I think that worked out okay, but again, it didn't quite turn into this opportunity for, let's say, you or some random people to kind of pick up a Japanese character for a week or two. I know a couple people did that, and we did the Japanese Battle Royal, which I was hoping more people were going to jump in on. That didn't quite pan out, but I mean, you got to try these things, I guess, to see if they'll work. So.
I mean, I can only speak for myself. My ignorance whenever it comes to the Japanese wrestling scene is pretty high. I have very limited knowledge of New Japan. It would have been like Naito or Okada, maybe Ishii. Like I have some semblance of knowledge about him. So it wouldn't have been anything on a large scale if I had brought someone in from the Japanese roster to join the EWA.
Again, that was kind of my thought, even though, even if you're not super versed in it, it might be something you would do for a short, again, maybe one night only, literally for the pay-per-view, just to kind of have some fun and do something a little different. And I know, like I said, I think through the years, there've been a lot of people that wanted to do Japanese characters, and then they very quickly fall by the wayside because it's very hard to translate that. Yeah, sort of figure out, well, how are you doing this, and how is, can they speak, and how are we reading the role plays, and it becomes a whole thing. So the idea there was just to be able to do that in the short term, and allow people a little bit more creative freedom. But again, like I said, it kind of ended up falling in a kind of a weird time. I think overall, I think it worked. I think it was pretty successful. I thought the show was different. I think most of the Japanese shows felt a little different. Like one person gave feedback on the second show, so I'm not sure what that was about. But everybody seemed to enjoy the pay-per-view. So, all in all, I think it came together okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, like you said, momentum coming out of there is pretty big right now. And like you said, we've seen some new people join up, and it kind of sucks because when the Fed is like this, like it is right now, and these new guys come in and they're here and they're like a house of fire and they're like, I want to be involved, and you're like, man, I wish that like Super Brawl was right now and we could have like these guys like at this level just competing with each other. So hopefully, hopefully they stick around. You look in the past, and the guy who ran Franklin Lashley, the guy who ran Crimson, there's been some guys who came in and had really good runs and just kind of burnt out after time, which is part of it.
Well, yeah, and I mean that becomes a kind of a difficult challenge, because you wonder sometimes, did the guy, because the Fed has grown, this person not being able to get a match one week, is that why they disappeared?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I don't know that he's disappeared, but like Scott Steiner came in, he did some interesting things, and then he just no-showed, and it was like, did he lose interest because he wasn't able to get booked a couple of times, or you're always kind of wondering those things.
Well, I mean, you look at like Ace Austin, like he had that match with Bagwell. Yeah, and then he was a really good writer, and he was
very interested in doing something.
Yeah,
it seemed like he couldn't quite get something going, and it's like, is that why he disappeared, or did something else come up? So I try to strike when the iron is hot, but sometimes scheduling conflicts and just the amount of time and available slots, sometimes people get lost in the shuffle a little bit, and I hope people can withstand that. But like you said, it's not like we can just be like, oh, it's Super Brawl next week, because we have a huge roster right now.
Yeah, and how, talking about how tough it is to stay active every week as a role player and keep your character active. Let's talk about some of the differences between you as a general manager and you as a role player. I'm just going to throw this out there. Have you had secret characters that you've personally ran in the EWA during your tenure?
And
why was it Doink the Clown?
I don't think I've ever admitted to being a Doink the Clown.
You didn't have to.
I may have been a Doink at some point.
Damn you!
I'm not sure if I was that Doink.
Let me ask you this. And we didn't talk about this before. This is me just posturing. This is me guessing. And if I'm right, you can tell me. And if I'm not, you can lie to me. That's fine too. Were you, just in the last couple years, Hacksaw Jim Duggan?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Okay, I'll take that.
But interestingly, and I don't know, this will date back way back, but interestingly, I was Taru,
really?
which was one of the people that John selected to be as one of his. So I don't think I've ever revealed that before. So there's your exclusive.
Oh wow, exclusive! I can't wait to put that in the title.
Yeah. I don't remember how many years that dates back, and I don't remember if I was running the Fed then or not, but yeah, I did do him for a little while. And anybody that read those role plays there were probably some telltale signs actually in there. I don't know if those role plays are still exist, because between Zeta boards and Envision Free and Tap a Talk, God only knows what remains.
So what was it like to get back out there recently as Suzuki in your match against Ken Shamrock? How did that feel?
That was a lot of fun. It was different. It had been a while since I had really sat down and wrote some role plays, and it kind of came about in a weird way. Originally, so Brett came to me
having some. I lost you right in the middle. Brett, start over with Brett came to you.
Well, sorry. Brett came on me, and Brett came to me and said that he wanted to make a comeback, and then the Japanese tour was coming up, and so he decided that he was going to come back into Japan with Shamrock. And so I thought that was kind of a cool idea, and so we kind of tried to hype that up a little bit. And then we decided that he was going to face somebody, right? And then I guess Brett kind of, I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, but originally Josh was going to be the person he was going to face, and he was going to face Liger, and then somehow that got turned into Suzuki, and I think Brett kind of came up with a whole story on that Shamrock was going to be in Japan this kind of time away since losing the title, and he was going to be, seeking some sort of vengeance for things that happened years ago with Suzuki or whatever. I said, okay, that sounds great. Sounds like an interesting thing. And again, kind of ties into that not a normal match that we would be having at the Tokyo pay-per-view. And then, stuff was going on with Josh and he wasn't able to do the match. And so Brett's like, well, what's going on? Like, I kind of had this idea and we've kind of planted the seeds and now it may not happen. And I said, well, if we can't find somebody to do it, I'll just do it. So I agreed to do it. Not really. I don't know that I really had planned on actually where it was going. And I didn't realize maybe that Brett had such elaborate sort of plans for it. So he kind of built it up, all the credit to Brett because he really came up with a really strong story. And then I was left to role play as Suzuki. And I know what I know about him, you could probably fit on a postage stamp. So it left me with the sort of the blank slate to work with,
Yeah.
And but thankfully, like I said, Brett had kind of planted the seeds for a good story. It wasn't hard to figure out his character's motivation. So then it was just up to me to sort of figure out how I was going to play Suzuki. Was it going to be that he was, maybe he did do these things that Brett alleged, or was he going to be, completely dismissive of all that? And so I kind of thought that an interesting take would be that he just didn't really care one way or the other, that here Shamrock had become this sort of bitter, he kind of become bitter and twisted about this thing that happened 20 some odd years ago. Yeah. And Suzuki was it was not really important to him. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting take, and it allowed me to write a couple of, I think, fun role plays, a little bit different, certainly outside of what I would maybe normally do. I don't know that those were like great examples of my role playing style or anything, but I thought I told a couple of kind of interesting stories. One of them, actually, the first one that sort of went into the history of his father and all this stuff, was actually kind of based on a true story, not about Suzuki again, because I don't know a whole lot of anything about him. But years ago, I had met somebody from Japan who had actually had a family member that had a similar story, not quite as concise or as conflicted as the one I told, but it gave me a good sort of basis to build around. And so I kind of just twisted that and was inspired by that to sort of create a story. And then my second role play, I'm actually blanking on what I did for that one.
You just had Suzuki get drunk on sake, if I remember correctly.
Yes, well, there was that. But see, now I have to pull it up because there was something else that I did there that I was intrigued by. But yeah, I mean, overall, it was just a fun. Oh wait, here we go. It's terrible when you have to look up your own. Yes, I was inspired by. I was trying to find young photos of Suzuki. Mm-hmm. And because I knew he'd been around for a long time, obviously, because he was fighting Ken Shamrock 30 years ago. And I found the old photo of him and when he was a young boy with Antonio Inoki. Wow. Yeah. And so that kind of started that sort of spiral, kind of gave me a concept to work around there. Basically sort of learning how to navigate the business and respect and And I wanted to kind of tell Suzuki's side of Shamrock's story. And so for him was that, Shamrock was really good, but that he was, too arrogant and too cocky. And that kind of comes from a real place too, because if you've ever heard anybody talk about Ken Shamrock when he was first getting into the wrestling business, because most people don't realize this, but he was a wrestler before he was a mixed martial artist. Or somewhere in the between. He was a wrestler before most people realized he was a wrestler. He was super arrogant, and maybe not. He believed his own hype,
Right.
People would say that, he would really think that he was the baddest man on the planet and all those things. And so I just kind of tied it into that. And basically, Suzuki just saying, look, you were cocky and we wanted to humble you. And we did. And here you've sort of spiraled out of control all these years, and you always blame somebody else for something. So I tried to draw on some, real inspiration, and it was fun. I mean, I liked it. I actually thought I did pretty good on those couple of role plays. They weren't anything special.
I thought they were well done too, but at the end of the day, you still lost, so you suck. And
I mean, look, I made the hard decision to put somebody else over me.
The most selfless man in EFED entertainment.
I mean, I don't want to say that I'm a martyr, but perhaps I am.
You are. There were a lot of people who thought Brett should not have won that.
I probably got like 50 PMs saying
it was just me. I think it was just me.
It was just you, but there was many PMs.
I kept sending them from all my different accounts.
You just kept saying, please beat Brett. Probably my most favorite thing actually I did in those role plays is I was trying to figure out, again, the Japanese thing. And I was just like, well, how, is he just speaking English? And how do people understand this? And some people had done the sort of, this is supposed to be said in Japanese and so on and so forth. And I was just like, so I just put a little line in each of my role plays. You're fluent in Japanese. That's how you can understand what's going on, because of course you're fluent in Japanese.
And so will you be okay with that in in somebody else's role plays if they're just like, for the sake of this, you're fluent in Japanese?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, to me, it was like, yeah, okay, that's how you get around it. Obviously that wouldn't work on a show if you were cutting a promo or something, but for those sort of role plays, I thought it worked. I don't know. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I know people, and that it's not just for Japanese wrestlers. I've seen people do it for anybody that sort of speaks some sort of foreign language. They either post it in there, and then you have to translate it. Or translations in there, and it's a whole thing. So I just thought it was a real easy way of not thinking too much about it.
John messaged me as we were working out the Dunn Skrull stuff, and he's like, you really haven't touched on how Marty is from Britain or UK or whatever it is. He's like, you haven't made that a part of his character at all. And I was like, well, I'm not from there. So like anything I said would just be, one, the most rudimentary basic of UK knowledge, or two, just me making it up. You'd be like, Marty Skrull eats crackers with bananas on them, as is the delicacy in the UK.
Right. Yeah, you can do some research and you can draw a little bit from that, but then you kind of have to just make it your own thing. I mean, if you don't know beyond a certain point, you got to kind of just make it your own thing. And I think you've done that with Skrull, and I think that was kind of what I did. Like I said, I did meticulous research on Suzuki. I mean, I wouldn't lie, but it wasn't like from that I was an expert in anything. I just said, okay, well, now I'm going to make up what I think this means, or what this is going to be, what his story will be, but it probably does not tie anywhere to what his real life is. I had to do the math on the ages of people. So when I did this thing about the father, it was like, okay, well, he couldn't have been here during this time because he wouldn't have been alive. So so it was like, okay, then he's telling this story, but he wasn't actually there,
I think I have like weird Googles too, where I think if I went there right now into autofill, it'd be like, what time is it in Japan right now?
Right.
Stuff like that. So like, there's probably 7 or 8 searches on both my computers that just says, "Is Judy Bagwell alive?" I guess I've Googled that so many times because I get to a point with her in the role plays where I'm like, God, if she's dead and like has been passed away for a while, and I'm just making her like this crazy sex craved nymphomaniac, like I'm gonna feel so bad about that if that's true.
You're gonna feel bad, but there's really so many fun ways you can take that if it ever comes out, and I hope it comes out by somebody like finding that out and then using it against you in a role play. And then you have to counter it somehow.
They just don't tell me. They just show me in a role play. They're like, Judy's been dead for 7 years.
Yeah, she's been dead this whole time.
Like, oh shit. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Not that I wish death upon Judy Bagwell. She seems like a fantastic woman, but boy, the wheels are spinning right now. I could PM you like 30 ideas for
I mean, we have the soul of a plastic flamingo inside Big Show right now, which I think Cleve has done a tremendous job of rolling with those punches and working with it.
So a lot of people don't realize this. So maybe this is another exclusive for you.
Boom.
And it kind of goes into you're talking about me as an RPer, or because although I am a very traditional guy, and I'm, if you got to nail me down to being somebody, I'm a Jim Cornette guy. But that was, that whole crazy thing is basically my idea. I pitched that to Cleve around the time Charles was sputtering out. And we decided, and for whatever reason, I don't know, Cleve agreed. I mean, I repeatedly told him, please tell me no if you think this is the dumbest thing you've ever heard. But it was like, what if, you lose to the Big Show and you have this sort of feud with somebody that everybody kind of knows is not really here anymore. And then, what if Big Show tries to kill the flamingo and gets electrocuted and they swap bodies or minds? And so
well, let me interject by saying this. Cleve screenshotted that and sent it to Brett and I and said, what do you guys think of this? And Brett and I immediately said, you have to do this. Like, you have. And he's like, are you being for real? Like, he was really apprehensive, and we're like, yeah. Like, you have to do this. Like, this is a once in a lifetime situation that's been put on a platter for you.
Well, I don't think that kind of stuff works for everybody, and it doesn't work for everything. But he'd already had a plastic flamingo as a character for at least a year.
Yeah. And
I thought it was a fun chance to, do something with the Big Show, who technically still had some momentum of some sort, and gave him new life, would give the Flamingo family another member that they could do something with. And it allowed him to use this character that he had built up in kind of a great way as an actual wrestler now, so I thought it was fun. I mean, it was different, and he has done a fantastic job with that.
Just the way the character's written is just like this purely innocent, like naive person.
Right.
Yeah.
And prior to that, I don't think Scotty actually ever spoke. Mm-hmm. So, but he would, somehow be talking essentially. And so it was like, well, this was a great way to really give him a voice and really give him a physical thing. And then, there's a lot of fun ways you can end that at some point. If it ever does get ended, and nobody's ever really done a whole lot with the Big Show. He's kind of one of those characters like Kane that's really never had a great run. John did a pretty good run with Kane, but I mean, generally, Big Show again falls into kind of one of those characters that just never seems to be used right. So this is probably the best use we could come up for him.
I think that's kind of like a testament to writing. It's kind of weird. Like, it's writing for bigger guys is tough. Like, I think writing for Strowman in the times that I have has been tougher to come up with things because I'm just like, okay, Cody Rhodes can't do this because he just physically isn't capable, whereas I'm like, Strowman can pretty much do whatever he wants because he's like this giant person. So he's just like, I try and put him in these situations where I'm like in the description, I'm like, Strowman is carrying like 29 2x4s on his shoulder and stuff. You're trying to figure out like, how can I put Strowman in a situation where he's trying to overcome or learn something when he's like this genetic specimen? It's tough.
Or that you really, display that in the role play so that he stands out, because obviously in real life, whatever he does, he's going to stand out. But when it's just text, you have to be careful, because otherwise it's just going to kind of come across as the same as everybody else, right? So you have to kind of do something so that we know he's this big behemoth of a guy. And not to talk much about Charles, but one of the things I actually originally was sort of that I liked about Charles's role plays in the beginning is that he didn't speak at all about Big Show being a giant. And at first I thought this was a clever take on the Big Show, because he had like an office job and stuff, and I thought it was interesting at the time. I had no idea that I don't think he ever realized that the Big Show was a giant. So the first few role plays that he posted, that I was like, wow, this is kind of an interesting take. He's just he's just treating him like a regular guy. And then later it occurred to me that he just didn't realize that the Big Show was a giant. I don't think he had ever maybe seen the Big Show. And I know I suggested that to him one time. It's like, you do realize, like, he's the Big Show, right? So, I mean, he can do some things that other people can't do. And I don't think he ever got it. So, but
of all the stuff that Charles did, and obviously he became a living meme in the EWA for his climbing Mount Everest and killing the vampire and the time travel and the amazing race and all of that. But honest to God, my favorite one is when the Arizona Cardinals had him come out and he just beat the shit. Like he was a better football player, Big Show was, than every other professional football player. And he's like, I just ran into the end zone and knocked off every single tackler. And I was like, these are professional football players. He's having the Big Show just be like, I'm better than all these idiots.
Yeah, and he's running the complete length of the field and record time. And it goes back to, I don't think he realized that he was role playing as somebody who was like 7 foot, 500 pounds. But in the beginning, the first probably 4 maybe role plays, because he got a little bit of success very early on. And that was based kind of on that concept that he had him as just sort of a regular guy doing regular things. And I thought it was interesting until the more I saw of it, the more I realized that was not a clever take. That was his best take that he had. He didn't understand the character. And I think, you have to do that when you're role playing. You have to kind of understand your character and what you can do with them. And again, even if it's a physical thing, you have to sort of explain that in the role play so that it stands out and it doesn't seem the same as everybody else.
Yeah, and we could wax poetic about Charles. I'll just say this: when I officially came back to the EWA, we had Cody be a guest GM in June, and one of the first messages you had sent me in my return was like, "Hey, reach out to Big Show, do some stuff with him. He's kind of trying to find his place." And I remember going to his role plays, because I was like, okay, like I'm going to send him this segment. And I was like, he didn't have the Big Show, like with the speech code. And I was like, hey man, what color is Big Show's speech? And he's like, I don't know, I don't use anything. I was like, okay. And I was like, okay. So I just made his like bold black. And I was like, well, yeah, here you go.
I think he sent me a segment or two and it would be the same way. And, I was just like, okay, Big Show is just bold black.
Let's talk about that though, but like in a different way. Obviously, Charles was and still is a guilty pleasure for some, but let's talk about guilty pleasures for you. And I want to talk about real life guilty pleasures as far as wrestling goes, but I also want to talk about some people that came into the EWA with some weird gimmicks or weird storytelling tropes that you personally were a big fan of, even though they may not have had a longer run.
Oh, that's interesting. I probably should have wrote some things down here, but I didn't.
It's almost like I sent you questions before the week started.
It's like you had me prep and then I didn't.
The Newt classic.
Of course, I've had lots of characters that I have been guilty pleasures of mine.
Yeah, I like this so far.
People such as
I mean, that's a tough one because the characters haven't lasted a long time, but
seriously, we've had a lot of really interesting people come through. This is going to be way before anybody's time, and it's not a character that you would think. But we had a Hulk Hogan, who was actually a Hollywood Hogan, and it was handled by this guy Shiloh, who is now a professional wrestler and wrestles in OVW and a bunch of other places. Shiloh Jones, anyway. But his take on Hogan was really interesting because it wasn't sort of a traditional. I mean, it was the first sort of jokey kind of Hogan that we'd had, and it was, he just had he had a very unique voice. It was very distinct, and it was kind of goofy when I think Hogan was still being taken a little bit more seriously, and it kind of stood out to me because anytime you read one of those role plays, you bought everything the character, you really bought into that character. He could really drag you into that world. And I was always really a big fan of his. And he did a couple of other characters. I think he did a Stevie Ray that was along the same lines. I mean, really sort of fantastic, unique characters that was kind of a guilty pleasure of mine.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any myself. I'm sure there have been a couple where I'm like, that's just really, really good and different.
There was a guy, this wasn't in the EWA, although he was in the EWA for a cup of coffee, so maybe 2 or 3 matches, and it just didn't work out. But it was in another Fed that I was in, another Fed that I ran, and we had a guy who did Virgil, which in and of itself is pretty hilarious. But he did him as Verge, and he was kind of this badass, but he was a complete idiot. And then he had Don Marie with him, and he did this really fantastic Don Marie and doing the sort of the old ECW dumbass Don Marie. And if you could just sort of imagine Don Marie and Virgil palling around, and then Virgil still kind of being like a badass in the ring, but having just sort of, calamity on the outside in his everyday life. It was a super guilty pleasure of mine because everything that he did I thought was just solid gold. And it walked the line between hilarious, but not so out there that you couldn't believe it,
Do you think it's characters like that help make an E-Fed great? And I'm not trying to put them in this category, but characters like Bradley, or do you think it's the Pete Dunnes and the Marty Scurlls and the Cody Rhodes and Val Venuses that help make the EWA what it is?
I think you have to have a balance, and I really do. If you look at some of these other E-Feds, if you look at like a creator wrestler E-Fed, it's all so bad, right? Because everybody sort of hones in there. Everybody's sort of a cross between the Undertaker and Jeff Hardy and Edge or something. Everybody sort of reads the same. And then they're all, all of their characters are based on photos from, some kind of show on the CW.
Yeah.
But, so that doesn't work, and I think you have to have a certain amount of realism and real characters that are grounded and that are, really solid, like a Pete Dunne or, Cody Rhodes or whatever, right? Like the characters that sort of are kind of the mainstays of the Fed, but then there has to be a little bit of wiggle room to do things that you can only do in an E-Fed, and that's, Big Show with the brain of a plastic flamingo, or Bailey with a mustache, and when it's done well, it works. Sometimes it isn't done well and it doesn't work and it just falls flat. And then everything I read, it's like, oh, this is terrible. But when it's done well and it really works, I think sometimes you have to exploit the EFED format. And so I am a fan of that kind of stuff. Anytime you can get that sort of unique voice for somebody that wouldn't have a chance at any other Fed. And I think that's what makes the EWA what it is, because you have that. And I mean, in general, the EWA has always gravitated towards sort of offbeat characters, but often are taken very seriously or done very well. But I think having that nice mix, and so it's not just everybody being as crazy as they can, but a few sort of crazy, quirky characters that could only happen in an EFED, I think makes it special.
Has there ever been anyone where like you saw the app and you were like, no, and then like you read their stuff and you're like, oh, okay, like yeah, this makes sense, like or someone who after maybe a couple of role plays like really kicked it into high gear?
Nobody's jumping out at me, but I'm sure that's happened. There's been a few times where people have signed up as characters that I have no idea that they're a real person.
Oh yeah.
And that happens a lot. And so as a matter of fact, that happened not that long ago, and I don't remember who the character is. It was whoever Tomko signed up as. Surely.
Oh yeah.
I still don't know the guy's name. It's like, Rick Johnson or something. And it was like
Rick Rockerson or something like that.
Yeah, it's like who is that? Like, what is that? And so I have to like Google it and make sure that that's a real wrestler of some sort. Actually, another guilty pleasure I had, and you worked with this person a little bit, but the Brad Maddox and Vicky Guerrero.
Yeah, he was really good, or she was.
She was fantastic. Really had a unique voice, did things, sort of comical, but yet still enough that you could take them seriously.
Yeah.
Super guilty pleasure. Would have loved to have seen a lot more of that.
Yeah, we were in the entourage together. That was the first faction I was ever a part of.
Yeah.
That's fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everything was fun. Anytime you read it, it was you could easily get engrossed into the role plays. And like I said, it was a little bit of an offbeat world, but not so much that it was completely ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's someone I haven't thought about in a while. I haven't thought about that group in a while. It kind of puts you into perspective, like how long you've been doing this. I mean, how do you keep doing this, man? Like writing results every week at the level that you write them at. Like how... yeah, that's just pretty much it. Like how do you even do it, man? Like I get burnt out writing segments and role plays, and you know how I feel about segments. Soapbox time.
Well, it can be. There are weeks, and I mean, I think if you go back and listen to the other two podcasts I do with, there are certainly weeks that it's like I'm done. I can't do it anymore. It's exhausting, and you can, even if you try to really put yourself into each match and really get involved, a lot of times there are still matches that you're writing that the characters aren't fleshed out. The matchup itself is not particularly interesting, even on paper, both from an EFED standpoint and a real wrestler standpoint. So you have very little to work with, and it kind of becomes sort of just a generic match. That's tough. So I try to, hunker down on the matches there is something really fun, or there's something in a role play that really triggered me to give me some inspiration to make the match better or make the match unique in some way. So it ebbs and flows. I mean, part of the reason that I just keep doing it is because I just refuse to let things go, and I don't like to see things sort of half-assed or not live up to their potential. And I'm afraid, like, if I'm not doing it, then it's just going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so I just keep trucking along. So sometimes it's a real grind to get through, and then other times things are interesting and lots of characters are going on, and I'm really excited about it, and so I have a lot of fun writing the matches.
That's what I say. Like sometimes you can kind of see, the steps down the road where you're like, hey, like Summer Stampede's going to be pretty lit, but then you have to kind of like slosh through like the slams leading up to it to get there, but you can like see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can be like, okay, like this slam was kind of, segment heavy, and the matches weren't that competitive. But Summer Stampede looks like it's going to be pretty dope.
Right, and it's so sometimes you're looking forward to something, and sometimes something just comes along that's kind of fun. I think it was last Slam where the two, Brian Pillman and Brian Kendrick, had a match, and I thought I tried to write like a really good competitive match because it seemed like it was both characters I could totally feel who the characters were. I understand the wrestlers themselves. I understand how they could actually have a good match, and so you find some inspiration in that and try to put together something really good,
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times that will just sort of give you a little bit of extra energy or a little bit of extra life. But then sometimes there's a really good pay-per-view, and I know that there's a bunch of good matches, and the role plays have been good, and the characters are good, and it's Sunday, and I realize I still have 8 matches to write.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then I still want to quit,
Oh, yeah.
Even though I liked everything and I like everybody involved, it's still just sometimes a lot of work.
It's a tough job for you, and I know job is a loose term for it. Some would consider it a form of work, but
prison.
Prison for others. Yeah, but I mean, it's got to be tough for you. A lot of the questions that I got, especially from newer folk, were talking about what do you look for in role plays in determining a winner. Someone who has been very active within the EWA for years sent me a message to ask you and said, how do you define momentum and how does one obtain that? Because I've said in the past, you have not, but when people have asked me, how do I find success in EWA? And I say, stay consistent, keep your guys on the show, and build momentum. I was like, I think momentum is the number one most important thing. Obviously, outside of your writing in the EWA, have your character, hanging W's on the board as they head into big matches, and that will work in your favor.
Well, I can't believe you told people that because that's absolutely wrong.
I can't believe that. You need to lose every match.
That's right. No, I mean, I think those things are all very accurate. I mean, anybody that's listened in the past, I think I've said that, that there's always sort of an intangible element that doesn't really isn't always, it can't be clearly defined. I mean, there is not a formula. So anybody hoping that I'm going to give them some great formula for how to win, there really isn't one. I mean, it's not you add this plus this and you will always win.
Yeah,
that's just not the case. So many people and so many characters and so many years that I've done this, you see all kinds of role plays, and it has to connect to me on some level. The writing has to be solid. It has to be. I mean, there are a couple of things that will always be against you. And I know you know these. Don't center your role plays.
Yeah.
Make them visually pleasing to the eye. So you don't have to make them super fancy. I'm okay if you want to do colors and photos and all that stuff. That's fine, but do it in a way that it doesn't hurt my eyes to read it. And I'm not going to say that if somebody wrote the most amazing role play ever and it was centered and in bright colors that I would make them lose necessarily. Yeah. But if it's difficult for me to read from a physical standpoint,
yeah.
It probably will hurt you.
I mean, yeah, I've given my fair share of feedback in the past where I've just said, don't make your actions red. Like, it freaking hurts to read it. It hurts your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you literally have to, click and drag and highlight the words so they're not in bright red.
Right. So, if it's something like that, that stuff can sort of work against you. Again, that's not it's not going to necessarily kill you, but it shouldn't be. You'll probably just get a message from me. Please stop doing that.
Yeah.
But those things are, if there's any ingredients, those are the ingredients that you want to make sure you don't use. But beyond that, you just have to kind of find a voice. I have to really get invested in the role plays somehow. Things that people sometimes do they'll pull out something, if it's a big match, they've now pulled out some storyline element that they want to matter, but they haven't planted the seeds for it to matter. So if you're at your big match and now you're suddenly telling me that you've waited for this because of X, Y, and Z, and you've never mentioned X, Y, and Z before, then I just kind of completely lose interest in it because you've just sort of made this up to make it important,
Oh yeah, like if you're like, I've never met my birth mom, and then all of a sudden it's just like, I've waited my whole life to meet my birth mom, but you've never mentioned in any role play before that you haven't met her.
Right.
So, you're just like, what? Like, where's this coming from? Like, it can't just be important because you're having a big match.
Right. Or if you want to make the story about meeting your birth mom, that's fine, but you need to be planting those seeds over the course of weeks or months. And so, I don't like things like that. But I mean, sometimes a comedy role play can be really hilarious. Sometimes a really serious role play can be really good. Sometimes I enjoy just sort of a straight up kind of promo type role play where there's not a whole lot of, fanciful scenes and all that stuff, where it's a little bit more straight up. I can enjoy those as well. There's no, like I said, there's just no formula. It just kind of depends on if there's something there that I think is good and that it engages me. And again, by all means, I'm not the greatest person in the world or anything, but I have seen and read a lot of role plays, so I do know the genre and I know what happens and what people can do. And I've seen so many types of things that sometimes you think you're telling a story that's so original and so creative, and I've seen it 100 times. So, and that doesn't mean I can't still get invested in it because maybe it's a good story, but at the same time, that's, just something that maybe sometimes is a knock against people because they don't realize that. The other thing that I think people do, and again, I don't know if I'm telling so much what to do as more so what not to do.
That's fine too, yeah.
Sometimes brevity is good. People have a tendency to just go on and on and on and on. And if it takes me 10 minutes of reading to get to the first line of dialogue about your match or your story or your character, and you spent 20 minutes telling me about the curtains in the room, I'm not a huge fan of that. If it becomes a chore to read, even if the content is good, it sort of becomes negligible by the time I get to the bottom because I've forgotten half of what you said because I'm reading more and more about the curtains. Now, if you're telling a role play about curtains and you can make that important, that's fine. But if it's just sort of background information that you've
fodder,
that I just don't care for. It's fine if you're going to do a little of that, but there are people, and there's still even people in the Fed today that maybe go on too long, and they may occasionally lose because I lost interest halfway through the role play because it's so much to get through.
It's tough for, I mean, I don't want to say it's tough for us, but it's like, you're the judge. So we kind of feel like half of us is like we're writing to impress you because you're the judge. And probably more than half of how we feel about it. Whereas the other part of us is just writing the story that we want to tell. It's do you ever feel any pressure about having to be the person that judges these matches?
On a regular daily basis, not necessarily, but when I know people that have like put really a lot of time and effort into stuff and they have told incredible stories and it's really good and their opponent has done the same thing, that's when it's difficult because there are times when, you might as well flip a coin because both guys have done fantastic stuff and they could be completely different. Maybe somebody wrote something that was sort of humorous, but it was so well done and so, literally made me laugh out loud. And then somebody else has something that they wrote and it's very serious and they're very engaging and they've told this gripping story. and then you put them up together, and it's like, well, which wins? What was better? Or maybe both of them told this really gripping, engaging story, and then it's even harder to maybe because there's almost no differences between the two. I find that happens a lot, and so that becomes difficult, and that's when I don't like that job. That's where sometimes momentum comes in, like you mentioned. I can't say that momentum is going to guarantee you a win in anything.
Right.
When it gets to those really tight instances, and role plays are basically the same, or I would, if I'm giving them a score and I've given them both a 5 out of 5,
out of 100.
Out of 100, no, which I mean, I guess it works out the same too, really, if they both had 5s out of 100. But if there's really no differences and that kind of equals out, you do kind of look for what is going to give one person the edge or not. And so maybe some momentum might be a part of that. I know I've mentioned in the beginning that sometimes it's hard for people to win when they first come in because it's not even necessarily momentum, but it is to some degree, but they just don't have a story. I'm not invested in them yet because it's the first time I've seen them. That doesn't mean that you're always going to lose your first match, because sometimes people can come in and immediately tell a story that I'm interested in. But a lot of times they're going up against somebody who has weeks of stuff that they've been kind of building up. And so I'm engaged much more naturally to that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's right or wrong. It's just the way it is, right? So I think that's kind of a momentum factor where if you've been telling a good story over the course of a few weeks or months or years, then it makes a lot of your stuff just more interesting to read, So it feels like I'm, revisiting an old friend as opposed to just sort of learning something new, or reading something about somebody that I really don't understand or don't know about.
If it's like an introductory role play, it's hard to get invested into everything.
Right. And I mean, sometimes people can do that really well. But then a lot of people can do that and they can't follow up. A lot of times we have people that have a really good short story that could go for maybe their first couple of matches.
Yep.
And then there's an end to it. Val Venus was a great character, and he was able to stretch that out for a long time. But eventually, the Barry Blossom, or whatever the hell his name was,
Barry Blaustein.
Yes, Barry Blaustein. Eventually, that story was tired. That was no longer interesting, and eventually he got rid of him, and I think it was no longer interesting for him either to keep doing that character and sort of documenting Val Venus's life story in that way. But that was something that kind of only worked in a short period of time. And again, he was able to kind of stretch that pretty.
It was like 8 or 9 months, yeah, almost a year.
Right, he stretched that pretty far. But a lot of times people will do that, where it's sort of a story that could be maybe contained within a month or two, but then they have nothing after that, And you either hang on to it too long, or when it wraps up, then you don't have anything. So, if you're trying to, get medicine for, or let's use a real world example here that's going on, the Luchasaurus foster care thing, right? That, or the orphanage, that can only go for so long.
Yeah.
It's interesting right now. And he's already kind of introduced a twist early on, which means he's shortened the lifespan of that to some extent, but that's only going to be interesting for a month or two, and then it's going to be boring, know. And if we're hearing about how he's trying to save the orphanage 3 months from now, Bryce has done a poor job with that story.
And Luchasaurus is terrible at saving orphanages.
Right. And all I can think of, and nobody has probably ever played this game, but the old Nintendo Three Stooges game, it's all about saving an orphanage, and they have to do all these stupid things to save this orphanage. And so every time I read one of those role plays, I'm thinking of the old Three Stooges video game.
There you go. Luchasaurus should play that in his next role play.
He should. I mean, there's lots of great stories that can be told just from that game alone. But But that's a limited time story. So sometimes people can come in with a really good story, but Bryce needs to know what the good follow-up story to that is. And it can't be now he's trying to save a hospital, right? It's got to be completely different.
He's literally a superhero, yeah.
Unless, that becomes his gimmick and he's just charity man and he goes around trying to save different charities. But a lot of times people can have a short-term story that they like, but they just can't do anything past that. So I think you got to be able to be adaptable. I think everybody kind of runs into character fatigue after a while.
What about the PCO character? That's a character that seems like it had a very limited shelf life, but had a very high level of success within that time as well.
Absolutely. And so, like, I would have loved to have seen where Lou could have taken that, because that was a story that I thought for sure was going to be super short and over.
Yep. It was supposed to be his Halloween character.
Right. He was doing that very, very limited. And when he got involved with Shamrock, I thought, well, this is going to be kind of a good person for Shamrock to beat, and that'll be the end of it. Because PCO's running out of steam, Shamrock's in his prime, and then what happened is that wasn't what happened. Every time I thought the next PCO RP was going to be the last one, it just kept getting better. And
his Civil War, his Shamrock match role plays were phenomenal. I was like, thank God this guy is not in the match, because there is no way. Like, he wrote the best stuff of anyone that week by far.
Yeah. So it really, like I said, sometimes you can kind of plan stuff out in your head, or you can think that this is the way things are going to go. And so I mean, PCO is a perfect example, because I really thought he was nearing the end of his cycle, and I was like, well, this will be fun. He's going to fight Shamrock. He'll get kind of his big hurrah. And then what happened is the Shamrock started going down, and PCO was going up, and every PCO RP just kept getting better and better and better. And he was really good at telling these bizarre, gripping stories.
But like in the vein of reality.
Right.
Yeah.
And I really liked his stuff originally with Ariel, and I thought that could have actually went a little bit longer, and he kind of took it to the left, and I thought, well, okay, again, he's cut the lifespan of that story a little bit, and it's not going to end. Like I said, it just got better and better. I would have loved to have seen where he was going to go after that. After losing, I would have been very curious to see where that could have went. I don't think it would have been a long, eventually there would have had to have been something to click or change, because you couldn't do that forever. But,
Lou's also a case of a guy who was really, really good at this and just kind of fell off the face of the earth. And obviously he had computer issues or whatever that was, but those are the ones where you're just like, damn, like, that guy was good and did good feuds and had really good characters, and like, don't go. Like, we need
right.
you.
I really hope Lou shows back up at some point, and that happens sometimes. We have somebody that's really hot and they're good for a while, and then they're gone for a year, and then they pop back up, and it's like they were never gone. So I'm certainly hopeful that that'll happen. But I mean, he taught a master class in that, taking a limited term character and really stretching it out. But not everybody can do that, and so you have to be careful with that. And Brady has been sort of notorious for coming up with really good ideas and then not being able to follow through with them, because he loses interest or the story just doesn't plan out kind of the way he wants. And I know he kind of had, and that sort of even recently, and that's why he kind of stepped away, because he couldn't get anything really going what he wanted to get going. There have been others that have struggled with that, where they have a really good kind of concept, but there's nothing beyond that. And
it's like the concept is based on them winning every match to continue to tell their story, and then like they lose and they're like, well, shit, like, I wasn't planning on losing my first two matches, so now how the hell do I say this character is the biggest badass on the planet, but he lost his first two matches to Buff Bagwell and, like like a smaller guy, Brian Pillman Jr. Like, how am I supposed to make him a badass now?
I would totally, if you're signing up and you've come up with this concept in your head and you say, here's my story for the first year, this is my path to the title, and it involves you basically dominating and winning all the time. If you cannot lose anywhere in there, or you cannot lose more than once, scrap that story and come up with a new one. Because, and I mean, you don't know how many people who have sent me PMs about that. And it's like, well, I lost. And that, how am I supposed to continue my story? And it's like, well, if you losing any match derails your story, then it wasn't a very strong story, because it's pro wrestling. You're going to win and you're going to lose. And I'm not saying, you know, and so sometimes I'll just say, well, change the story. Like, and if you can't do that, then you don't have a real character. You know, if your story is based on one thing and it's all headed one direction, and that loss or something happens that kind of throws that off, you need to be able to adapt and go left or go right or zigzag where you hadn't originally planned to do that. That means you have a full fleshed out character that lives and breathes and survives in the environment. Otherwise you just have a concept and it's very limited.
Yeah, not every character. Yeah, you can't have everyone in the Fed being like, I'm thinking undefeated streak for the first 6 months. So
right. And I always tell people, you know, it's fluid. And while like I try to give people, I let people with a lot of creative freedom and stuff, sometimes I'll throw somebody in a match and they'll get really upset.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't part of their 6-month plan.
Yeah.
You have to fight Buff Bagwell this Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's like, change your plan, add a curve, you know.
And then they lose to Buff Bagwell and they're like, how am I supposed to recover from this?
I can never recover from this. This character is dead, right?
Well, time for a new application.
Yeah, so you need to be able to roll with the punches. You need to be able to change, because I'm going to throw 6 obstacles in your way, and if you still want to go to that same end goal, that's fine, but you got to do the gymnastics to figure out how you're going to end up back at that storyline junction that you wanted to be at. Yeah. So, you know, that's my advice to people is be flexible, be fluid, be able to change based on a loss, or
just be able to lose. Like, just be able to take a loss and tell a story with it. Like, you have to. You have to. Yeah,
and I mean, like, I get being upset about a loss, especially a tough loss. But everybody should be able to take that and turn it into motivation for something else. And if you can't, again, you probably have a sort of limited lifespan here, because even the best of role players have lost and sometimes go on a losing streak. I mean, John, who has been here forever and is, you know, can pretty much write any kind of character and usually has a pretty good handle on it. A couple of years ago, he kind of had a losing streak, you know what I mean, where things just never quite connected, or he had a really good role play, but the week he was facing somebody, it was, you know, they had a better role play, you know. And I don't remember what year it was. It wasn't this past year, but wasn't that long ago that he was losing a lot of matches, and even he was getting frustrated, but it was, you know, it was just kind of the way things went, you know. And then eventually he kind of retooled his characters and got back on the horse and everything worked, you know, and now he never loses. But
the classic John.
Well, I mean, of course, he also PayPal'd me $100.
Well, yeah. Got to get them birthday drugs.
I mean, that's the real secret to winning.
Just host a podcast.
I have a secret Patreon account that you can.
Link in comments.
Yes.
Down below.
If you subscribe at the highest level, you can win all your matches.
7-year subscriber right here, baby.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you're at the mid-card level, you might win some, you might lose some.
Bought that Civil War victory.
If only I was smart enough to actually do that.
You'd be a rich man, probably, in this bed for sure. You know, I know that you go through a lot of results, and you've judged many matches in the past, and it's hard for you to remember all of them. I do want to touch on last year's Super Brawl. And in that match, in the group role plays, every single group was using some form of transportation. And there were 2 of them that had plane rides involved in that. Can you speak to your reading of those and judging of those throughout that week, or those 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting because everybody kind of did the travel
same thing. Yeah, you know, it's so hard to come up with a group role play idea that 1 makes sense and 2 hasn't been done before.
Right.
Because that's the box you try and fit it in, you know.
I think the concept is you have to rent a Zeppelin.
Yeah.
You have to really do something bizarre, but nobody else. Yeah, I mean, there was I guess there was a little bit of redundancy there.
Keep going, you're fine.
Mom? No, so there was some redundancy there to an extent, but actually I thought they were different. Everything was kind of different enough. Obviously you kind of hope for something to be completely different so that you can kind of, especially on something like that where there's so many role plays involved, and you can kind of map out, okay, this is these people's story and this is this group's story. If you're able to do that, it makes it a little bit easier. And when there's a little bit of overlap in concepts or conflicts or things of that nature, and especially with Super Brawl, because everybody has kind of told all the sort of stories that are the quickest ones that come to mind when you say, okay, we're getting a bunch of group of random people together and now they're going to all be fighting for different motivations,
Oh, they're going to go to a therapist, group therapy session.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's been done quite a lot. I think I've shot that one down a few times and then done it once myself.
Right. So, that becomes a little tired and cliche, and every now and again somebody can do something that's I've seen 100 times, and they do it in such a good way, or the characters are just so strong that it works, and it works really well. But it is difficult to navigate that a little bit. But in terms of last year, I don't think there was any. I don't think that bothered me too much. I mean, yes, it was everybody's role plays were simpler in that travel sort of theme, but it didn't. Somehow that kind of worked because it was okay. Everybody's on their way to Super Bowl, Yeah. So maybe in that sense, everybody kind of doing the same thing worked a little bit, because then it put everybody in kind of the same box, and then you could sort of focus on the dialogue and the individual stories within the travel theme.
Group role plays have come a long way, especially Super Brawl group role plays. Obviously, Google. I was going to say Chrome, but Google Drive has helped out a lot with that. But I also think just the writing has gotten better over the course of the last 5 to 10 years when it comes to the biggest match of the year.
I think so. I think, I think the changes in social media and various different ways people get a hold of each other has definitely helped that. You're just able to do things a little bit more fluid than you could before. But also, yeah, I think you're right. I think, typically now the people that we have in Super Brawl are pretty mature role players. They're pretty unique. And then even if there are a couple of sort of younger role players, and I don't necessarily even mean age-wise, but maybe a couple the couple people that maybe aren't as experienced in it, that's either covered up by everybody else or they fit in enough that it just sort of works. And so you don't notice a huge difference, and I think that's just a testament to the amount of sort of good role players and things that we've gotten in the last few years.
What's your favorite part or thing about the EWA?
Probably just the different characters, being able to kind of see those things. I really love it when a storyline, when I can see one from beginning to middle to end. It makes me happy. I'm a big stickler for that. So sometimes I'll do things to try to finish out somebody's story, even if they've quit. Because I like to see something happen, some sort of ending point. So I hate to see a character come in and do things for a little bit and then maybe be building to something and nothing happens. So anytime I can see a story sort of blossom and come from a seed to a full flower, whatever, I enjoy that. I really like when I'm surprised by things. Like I said, we were talking about Lou earlier and being surprised by how good his role plays continued to be. I like that sort of thing where you open up a role play and it's like, wow, this was just fantastic. And I'm, totally bought into a character that maybe I wouldn't have before. I really like that kind of stuff. When a pay-per-view just hits and everything works and there's a bunch of good matches, I love that. That's a great it's weird, but it's a sense of pride or whatever. You post that show up and you're like, wow, this was a fantastic show. And I hope everybody realizes that and reads it and enjoys it. You know, and then every now and again you have a really good show and then somebody sends in a segment that's just awful and you're like, oh no, it's gonna ruin everything. You know,
looking at you, cuz. So that's your favorite thing about the EWA. But now it's time for the hottest segment in EWA podcast history, Newt. This video may get flagged for using Careless Whisper by George Michael as your song. But Newt, what is the penis in your anus about the EWA?
I love everything so much. I don't have any penis in my anus.
But before we got started, you said, oh, sorry.
That was what you were fingering me. I had a penis in my anus.
Throwback!
Anybody that's just now tuning in.
I'm just going to skip ahead and see what he says.
Yeah.
He was fingering it. We gotta go
clearly missed out on a lot. Probably, you know what? It's such a little thing that really jumps out to me recently has been a penis in my anus. And then this will just turn into a rant about a bunch of different things, but I'm just going to call Jeff out. He does not put the little, well, I don't even know what those marks are. The two little dots at the end of his
colon.
At the end of his, what's that?
You talking about a colon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, after his speech thing. Yes.
After his speech thing, he does not put them in, and it requires me to edit his segments every time and put them in, or I'll just forget to put them in, and then I'll go back and read the show later, and it won't have them, and it will drive me nuts. It's stuff like that. Like I really want. I'm not a super OCD person, but those kind of things, like I want the fonts to be sort of universal, the names to appear sort of universal in the show, the action sequences to appear sort of universal in the show. You know, anybody that's been in eFeds for years will know that a lot of times feds would just do whatever. And so people would do it just like their role plays. And so, you know, one time an action sequence would be in white and another time it'd be bold and pink, you know. And so I try to make everything here pretty uniform in that sense. And I've given people pretty open freedom to do whatever they want as far as their font colors and stuff for their names. But I want them to just be bolded and follow that sort of same format and have that at the end. And that drives me crazy. And Jeff's not the only one that does it, but he's notorious for doing it. Likewise, I had somebody send me a segment that they wanted done, but they didn't actually write the segment. And I was a little confused. And so I just ended up kind of writing the segment myself and throwing it into the show because it was sort of important to get this story across. Don't do that. That you know, that stuff drives me nuts. The only other, again, it kind of revolves around the same sort of thing. If you're submitting stuff, make sure it's stuff that kind of works and that it flows with the rest of the show, whether that's the format or, you know, if you're two guys that are kind of in the opening act, maybe don't use the monster truck and
destroy the ring.
Destroy the ring, and maybe don't use a chainsaw to cut up your enemy. You know,
maybe don't have a House of Horrors match in your first pay-per-view.
Well, yes.
Okay.
No.
You'll never guess what Newt says on this dramatic podcast.
But it's there's been some violence that didn't mean anything or didn't amount to anything in recent segments, and that sort of irritated me. You know, if you find that I'm editing your segments a lot, there's probably a reason for that.
I don't think I've ever looked for that.
Yeah, so
Mine are never that long anyway, so.
and maybe people aren't paying attention and they don't realize that I've cut out the part where they, stabbed their guy 4 times. But if I'm editing things, there's probably a reason.
Yeah.
Same with the profanity. We got a little ridiculous.
Okay. This is a hill I'm gonna die on with you. Like, I have been anti that. I'm like, this show was on TV.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, like, this is still, like, I know it's like pretend, but like, we're on TV. Like, you can't just say the F word every other word.
Yeah, so like I don't mind a little bit of things here or there, or especially if it matters, but if it doesn't, I've really started to crack down on this, and every now and again something just slips through and I don't even realize it, and then I'm like, oh, in their segment they had fuck in there 3 times.
You need to change it to like fart.
So I have
be like, I'll fart and kill you.
I have changed a lot in the last few weeks, or the last month or so, editing stuff to people's to make it less. But maybe I will just start doing it really like cartoonishly.
Yeah, that'll make people happy. There's one thing I know, people will love that. So
yeah, I'm sure
that was gonna be my guess, is like segment stuff. What about using Harry Smith without your permission?
I don't like that.
No, you're kidding.
I do not like that. I don't like Harry Smith used at all. I mean, I don't know how many people have PM'd me in the last month and said, I got this great idea for a story and Harry Smith's going to do this. And I'm just like, no. And it has nothing to do with anybody, or that I don't like your idea, but I'm not a big fan of this is how a match comes about because Harry Smith makes it. And, I again, and I'm sure I've said this in previous podcasts, but I really want Harry Smith to be more Jack Tunney than whoever the general manager is of
Vince. Just say Vince, yeah.
More Jack Tunney, less Teddy Long, right?
Yeah. Holla, holla, holla! It's Harry Smith.
Right. So if he does show up and he does make a match, it's a big deal. If he does that every week, and there was a period there where that happened a lot, and that was okay. But I've sort of pumped the brakes on that, and I've tried to remove him so you don't see him a whole lot. So then it matters if something happens. And I think if you're trying to tell a story and you need a match made, there's other ways you can go about it. For years, we didn't have a general manager who would make the matches, so you can certainly do that without having Harry Smith involved. I mean,
I think whenever we were doing our conglomerate run and it was Cody, Brock, and Harry Smith in there, and there was like some turmoil, I think I remember like in March pitching you an idea where I was like, listen, Super Brawl, Cody versus Harry Smith. We lay the groundwork now. We plant the seeds all summer, and then around like November we pull the trigger. And like your response was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like I had like this long message I sent you, and I was like, look, here's how we get here. I've got a road path. Like it makes sense. It's gonna be a huge match. And you're just like, no, I don't want to do that. And I was like, okay then.
Yeah, generally the answer, if it's get Harry Smith involved, generally the answer is I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Every now and again a story will come along and I think it's really interesting or it's good, and then I want to do it. As an example, and I mean this is a Harry Smith thing that came up just the other day. Z or Zed or Zippity Doodah, he did a thing with and the girl's name is escaping me. There's 5,000 women wrestlers now. Mm-hmm. But his new character, and he wanted to do this thing where afterwards Harry Smith was going to hug the girl. And I was just like, no, I don't really want to do that. I was like, but if you can use the agents, which I've tried to sort of incorporate as part of the show and so that they're available. And then I did that and nobody understood that. So he was very gracious, but he's like, oh, cool, that's no problem. I'll change it or whatever. And
she's like, then, Carrie Smith or Carrie Sane punches Harry Smith in the face.
Yeah, and so they changed it, and then everybody in the feedback was like, I don't understand why Tully Blanchard was there. And so I was like, well, has nobody read for the past month where like we incorporated these sort of backstage agents who were doing things? And Yeah, so
Good times.
so I've created characters that you can use to fill those roles to some extent without using Harry Smith extensively.
Well, I, for one, look forward to the Marty versus Harry Smith Super Brawl match that we're doing this year.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that.
I wish. Oh, I wish. Here's my thing. Let me ask you this. This is not a question that was prepped on you, but as we kind of wind down the podcast, obviously I've been in some high level feuds myself on the old Envision boards, Tappa Talk, and now through here. These boards are different as far as the private messaging goes. You can actually, unlike the old boards where you'd have to message one person at a time, you can involve multiple people in a group message on this one.
Yes.
I'm not one, and really haven't been one for the last 4 or 5 years, to keep you up to date with what I'm doing. Even when I'm like the world champion. It's like you and I have a conversation of, here's the match, and then I just kind of get there on my own. But I know that there are people that keep you in the loop for everything all along. Now, what's your preference on this? Is this something that you like, or is it a grind for you, or do you just generally dislike it, or do you not care?
It's different. I do like the feature of being able to loop 3 or 4 things, 3 or 4 people in. It's definitely handy. And especially if I'm trying to pitch maybe a story to a couple of different people, and I do like that. I don't need to be involved, I think, in every little bits and pieces. So there have been some threads that I've been involved in that maybe I just didn't get on the boards fast enough or something, and then there's like 6 messages, and I miss some of them because by the time I click on it, I don't realize that there's maybe been 3 or 4 interactions. Mm-hmm. And it is difficult, obviously, to find my name on here. So it's hard to know if you're actually PMing me or not. But I don't mind being involved in those. There are some that I think that's helped really nice, especially if the people that are responding are very sort of brief. Mm-hmm. I don't like those threads if it also includes all of the segments and
God, you know how I feel about that. Like I said in Cuzcast, I was like, I don't even give a shit if I have like 1 million PMs. Just start a new one. I hate having to scroll past like our 9 segments to get to like you saying at the bottom, looks good. Like I don't fucking need that.
Right. So if you've looped me in, that's cool. And if we're having a conversation and you say, hey, well, what about this week we do this? Or, hey, you know what, we changed our mind. Like if I'm getting the bullet points, that's great. But if I'm getting everything, I don't care for that as much, unless it's something that I'm really involved in and I'm really hands-on. But if it's just something you're kind of keeping me in the loop about, even if it's 2 or 3 people, that's fine. Just send me the bullet points. And if there's something that I think really stands out, or maybe I'll pitch something to you. Hey, what if you did this or whatever? That's fine. I don't mind being involved in that. But if it gets down to all the minutia and the segments and all this stuff, it becomes tough. I mean, I know I've said this in previous podcasts, and I'm sure I've said it on the board, but sometimes I get tons of PMs, and so, or I wasn't able to get on
dick pics.
Yes, usually.
Sorry.
And you just keep sending it, one thread. Let's split this up a little bit. But I get so many, and then sometimes maybe if I haven't visited the boards in an hour or 2, or heaven forbid I didn't get on one night, then there's so many to go through. So sometimes I kind of give, and people probably just think I'm an ass, but I just kind of give quick responses. Okay, that's fine, because I'm trying to burn through a few, and I apologize.
You didn't respond quick enough, so we just went ahead and killed Cody Rhodes. I hope that's okay.
There's a lot of that. But even this week, I apologized to a couple people because I was like, oh, you know what? My response probably came off like an ass, but I was just trying to burn through some quick PMs that I could kind of just give a quick answer to, that I didn't have to
Isn't sending messages on the phone like just a pain in the dick? Like I feel like private messaging on the phone, like on the forum on my phone, sucks.
Oh, you know what? Getting on the forum mobile just kind of sucks in general.
I hate it. Hate it.
No, I mean you can change it to the desktop
Yeah,
mode.
yeah, down at the bottom. Yeah.
It just isn't as good.
Mm-mm.
But in general, I mean, I'm okay with being in the loop, and I like the board for the most part. The new little features and little tweaks. Occasionally, things will just screw up. I know we were going to talk about Fury, and I'm sure you just axed that, but the Fury that I wrote a few weeks ago,
yeah.
There was some kind of malfunction in the junction with the coding, and it got to where, like, if I changed one thing on that show, like 5 things got screwed up.
Yeah.
And so, like, I had to keep editing and and so finally, when it was done, and I could not change it because it would screw a bunch of things up. And I forgot to give somebody their match or something, and then they were kind of upset about it. And I was like, I just can't put it in because it's going to cause too many issues. It's going to cause too many formatting issues at this point to add any more segments or matches to that.
Yeah.
So that's just a board.
Do you think Fury will ever make a comeback? I mean, that was our topic we were going to discuss. I'm a Fury proponent. I like Fury. I like what Fury does, but also it's an extra show in the week. It's you making sure that you're on Friday night so you can post the show and being around Friday night. That's difficult to do. I know for a lot of people, but I'm a big Fury fan.
I liked Fury. I liked being able to bring it back a couple of weeks ago just because we had several people that, for whatever reason, hadn't got their sort of free wins, if you will, from their CD role plays. You know, some people go a little overboard with that. But there were a few things so I like the concept of Fury. I enjoy writing the matches for it because it's shorter and I can write. Sometimes I can have fun with those. I can do a little bit more interesting things there than maybe I can in a regular show.
And you got Booker T on commentary.
Yes, Booker T's on commentary there, which is fun. You know, I think I've mentioned this before in other places, but like my favorite wrestling show is sort of like mid-90s WCW Saturday Night, where there's just a bunch of like jobber matches, but sometimes they would be fun and they would be interesting.
And like Dusty was on commentary just saying like the wildest shit.
You're just trying to entertain himself and Tony Schiavone and stuff. So I liked that. And so that, to me, that's kind of how Fury feels. And I like it when maybe some people that don't get sort of main event or major status on Slam, they're able to kind of use Fury to get some momentum. And I like that. And when we did Fury consistently a few years ago, Kevin Steen sort of become the king of Fury, and that became a thing. I like that. But even when I did this one Fury, what happened is people just sort of, it was another show. I got to get my segment in.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of stuff that probably could have been used on Slam and didn't need to be on Fury. Now, the flip side of that is when we did Fury consistently, some weeks nobody would send anything in. So
you probably don't remember this. There was one week where I was the only one to post role plays, but I did it for 3 different characters. So all 3 matches were just me winning.
Yeah. So there's things like that. So there's problems with bringing in a second show. It's generally pretty easy to write, but what my fear is that, especially with the Fed as large as it is right now, people will see it as there's a second Slam.
You got to look at it like this too. Like right now, I get it. Like right now, it makes sense because there's so many people here, and there's so many people trying to get their characters on. It would be good for it. But back in like April, it would have been destitute, and there wouldn't have been enough to fill out that show. So
right, and and I don't know how I say to people, they didn't get their segment in on Slam, so great, you can use it on Fury, or hey, you're not really getting action on Slam, do something for Fury or submit a segment for Fury. But what happens is if you have 3 segments planned out for Marty Scurll on Slam, and then we have a Fury coming up, and you also send me 3 segments for that, it becomes, you don't really need to be using Fury for that, And it's tough to tell people no to those sort of things. And then, like I said, sometimes then you get no segments. So I don't know. It definitely, the idea is in my head to do it. But I don't know that it will come to fruition. I think we have to kind of see how long the Fed will be as robust as it is. I can usually knock out a Fury pretty easily, but that again adds to more work when we're already having big bloated slams, and it gets tiresome.
No, I understand.
To write everything. So,
well, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about or bring to the Fed's attention with this podcast?
I think really we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah.
The only things really that we didn't cover is why you keep sending me all these photos of yourself.
You know, in my defense, EWA official just autocorrects to cuz in my phone. So I think that's right? I think that's where the mix-up is coming in. Where,
well, again, very hard to figure out
what part of the body you're looking at. I know.
well, that, but also it's very hard to figure out how to PM me. It's really difficult.
Does anyone know?
People have struggled.
Just use a shout box. Just use a shout box.
But yeah, you know, the only other things, you know, just in general, I do think the Fed is doing really good right now. I think vibes are good. People are getting along. This past couple of weeks, we had some great feedback. Again, there was a week there where like nobody gave feedback, and it was kind of weird. But we've been getting a lot of really great feedback. A lot of people are chipping in and doing things, whether it's graphics or
graphics been top notch. Some of the best that we've ever had.
Fantastic work there.
The GIF banners are spot on. Really great.
Yeah. Big fan of those. You know, people have been really helping out and doing a lot of little things, which is great because, you know, a few months ago, sort of the big complaints were that there wasn't enough other stuff going on. And, you know, John has been really on top of taking care of a lot of little things around the boards that sometimes I just don't have time for, I forget, or just the tedious things that make me hate running the place. He's been fantastic with that and doing the Ross report and things of that nature. So I've tried to incorporate a little bit more stuff. And then other people have been helping out and doing additional things. So I feel like maybe the Fed is in a really good place because there's more going on. It's a little bit more rounded. Thankfully, nobody's asking for rankings. But other than that, I think things are really, really going well. I'm quite happy with where we're at the last few months. It's been probably some of the best times I think EWA's had in many, many years.
Well, you know, Newt, I think that that good feeling and that idea and thought that the EWA is running well starts at the top. And it really can't get any higher than your EWA World Heavyweight Champion, Craig. Heel turn on the podcast.
I thought you were gonna be nice. It's all about you.
No, I've been around, you know, not as long as others, but I've been around here for quite a while, and you know, it's probably for podcast 50 at this point. But you know, some people take the Fed really seriously and probably more seriously than they should. But I think this is a great place. I think this is the best eFed on the internet, and I know that it's got to be tiresome for you to continue to pump out the quality results and the quality work that you do, and week in, week out. And you know, there's really no way we can say thank you, but the feedback has been a great way to show that thanks to you, and it has been astronomical and phenomenal here the last couple months. There was like one slam that it wasn't that much, but man, the feedback has been so great. And it's just, you know, I talk about on the podcast in the past that it just feels good to know that people are reading your work, and it's the same for the results. Like, you want to know that people are reading the work and time that you're putting into these results, and I think that's what you've seen with the feedback recently. So I know that my thank you from everyone can only go so far, but their words and their kindness with that feedback has probably gone further than any thank you could.
Oh yeah, it really has, and I greatly appreciate that, and I do enjoy, and I think it's I think when you have multiple people doing it, I know you tried to do this for many years to sort of engage people to do feedback. When more people do it, it sort of spawns onto somebody sees somebody else doing it, and they're like, oh wow, that was really good, and yeah, well, I kind of want to give my thoughts on these things too. And it becomes sort of a snowball effect where several people really engage, and there's a whole thread about that. And this past week, I know we were almost onto the next show, and people were still kind of chiming in with some additional thoughts on the week before. I love that. And I think, when Bryce did his big podcast, whenever that was, a couple of months ago, and it was sort of like, oh, EWA is in trouble and things are hurting and blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm not throwing Bryce under the bus here. This was just sort of his observations. And it was like, are we dying? Are we close to the end? And I never felt that was the case. And I think when you look now, this is sort of a perfect example of that, because we're in sort of a new renaissance. And I think EWA goes through this every couple of years where there's some lean times and there's some off times. And then we just sort of, flourish at other times. And I feel like right now we're in like one of these really nice, high flourishing times. So probably by Super Brawl, there'll be like 4 people here. But right now it's good. And so hopefully everybody enjoys it and everybody's sort of firing on all cylinders. And that encourages me to keep going and makes me want to do more. And I think it does for John and all the people sort of helping out and doing what they can. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I thank you for coming on. I know that it can be tough for you to come on and be open and honest about stuff because you can't make everyone happy. So it's just important to me that you made me happy by coming on here. So, well,
I'm really drunk, so
I mean, I could tell. So
I won't remember any of this in the morning.
I don't understand why, like, you answered the webcam chat and then right before we started, you said turn that off. I personally, I think the goatee looks good. I mean, I'm surprised that you let it go all the way back around to your neck, but it looks good.
The things that I show you on that webcam.
Oh, my bad. I'll edit this out.
Are not meant. I mean, most people cannot put their fist in those places.
I know you're impressed.
But I showed you that because it's a great party trick. Okay?
Yes, it is. Well, Newt, thank you for coming onto the podcast. Can't wait for your podcast, NewtCast 5.0, whenever that winds up being. But
6 years from now.
6 years from now, yeah. You're a great asset to the Fed, and I think, I don't think your best years are behind you because you continue to put out top-notch stuff. So I'm looking forward to heading into the next few months and working with you and telling stories with my friends and comrades in the EWA, and just looking forward to the future and what it holds.
Yeah, me too. Like I said, I'm enjoying things right now, and I think there's only up from here. It'd probably be down, but it's nice to think that it's pretty much only up from here. And I think we've had a lot of really great people come in the last couple of months, and
I agree.
And it excites me for the future. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you for coming on.
Get the title off of you.
And then we're really going to the top after that. So, no, good stuff. Thanks for coming on. And if you want to come on the EWA podcast, I know a lot of you new listeners out there that just joined the EWA think that this might be a great way to get out there and tell your story. I would love to hear from you. Would love to get some new people on, so I'll be reaching out to people soon. Just shoot me a message on Discord, which you can find the link for in the Join Us thread and on the forum if you'd like to hit me up on there. I will not respond via mobile because it's atrocious. But thank you, Newt, for coming on, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.